Saul was dead, and David had returned to Ziklag after slaughtering the Amalekites. 3 days later, a man arrived from the Israeli army with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head as a sign of mourning. He fell to the ground before David in deep respect. "Where do you come from?" David asked. "From the Israeli army," he replied. "What happened?" David demanded. "Tell me how the battle went." Then the man replied, "Our entire army," let's read that again. And the man replied, "Our entire army fled. Thousands of men are dead and wounded on the field, and Saul and his son Jonathan have been killed." "How do you know they are dead?" "Because I was on Mount Gilboa and saw Saul leaning against his spear with the enemy chariots closing in upon him. When he saw me, he cried out for me to come to him." "Who are you?" he asked. "An Amalekite," I replied. "Come and put me out of my misery," he begged, "for I'm in terrible pain, but life lingers on." "So I killed him." "You lying wonder." "So I killed him, for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown and one of his bracelets to bring to you, my lord." David and his men tore their clothes in sorrow when they heard the news. They mourned and wept and fasted all day for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the Lord's people, and for the men of Israel who had died that day. Then David said to the young man who had brought the news, "Where are you from?" And he replied, "I'm an Amalekite." "Why did you kill God's chosen king?" David demanded. Then he said to one of his young men, "Kill him." So he ran him through with his sword, and he died. "You die self-condemned," David said, "for you yourself confessed that you killed God's appointed king." Then David composed a dirge for Saul and Jonathan, and afterward commanded that it be sung throughout Israel. It is quoted here from the book Heroic Ballads. "O Israel, your pride and joy lies dead upon the hills. Mighty heroes have fallen. Don't tell the Philistines, lest they rejoice. Hide it from the cities of Gath and Ashkelon, lest the heathen nations laugh and triumph. O Mount Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you. Let no crops of grain grow on your slopes. For there the mighty Saul has died. He is God's appointed king no more. Both Saul and Jonathan slew their strongest foes and did not return from battle empty-handed. How much they were loved, how wonderful they were, both Saul and Jonathan. They were together in life and in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. But now, O women of Israel, weep for Saul. He enriched you with fine clothing and gold ornaments. These mighty heroes have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan is slain upon the hills. How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan. How much I loved you, and your love for me was deeper than the love of women. The mighty ones have fallen, stripped of their weapons, and dead. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. David then asked the Lord, "Shall I move back to Judah?" And the Lord replied, "Yes." "Which city shall I go to?" And the Lord replied, "Hebron." So David and his wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal from Carmel, and his men and their families all moved to Hebron. Then the leaders of Judah came to David and crowned him king of the Judean confederacy. When David heard that the men of Jabesh Gilead had buried Saul, he sent them this message: "May the Lord bless you for being so loyal to your king and giving him a decent burial. May the Lord be loyal to you in return and reward you with many demonstrations of his love. And I too will be kind to you because of what you have done. And now I ask you to be my strong and loyal subjects now that Saul is dead. Be like the tribe of Judah who has appointed me as their new king." But Abner, Saul's commander-in-chief, had gone to Mahanaim to crown Saul's son Ishbosheth as king. His territory included Gilead, Ashuri, Jezreel, Ephraim, the tribe of Benjamin, and all the rest of Israel. Ishbosheth was 40 years old at the time. He reigned in Mahanaim for 2 years. Meanwhile, David was reigning in Hebron and was king of the Judean confederacy for 7.5 years. One day, General Abner led some of Ishbosheth's troops to Gibeon from Mahanaim, and General Joab, son of Zeruiah, led David's troops out to meet them. They met at the pool of Gibeon, where they sat facing each other on opposite sides of the pool. Then Abner suggested to Joab, "Let's watch some sword play between our young men." Joab agreed. So 12 men were chosen from each side to fight in mortal combat. Each one grabbed his opponent by the hair and thrust the sword into the other's side so that all of them died. The place has been known ever since as Sword Field. The two armies then began to fight each other, and by the end of the day, Abner and the men of Israel had been defeated by Joab and the forces of David. Joab's brothers Abishai and Ashiel were also in the battle. Ashiel could run like a deer, and he began chasing Abner. He wouldn't stop for anything, but kept on single-minded after Abner alone. When Abner looked behind him and saw him coming, he called out to him, "Is that you, Ashiel?" "Yes," he called back, "it is." "Go after someone else," Abner warned, but Ashiel refused and kept on coming. Again, Abner shouted to him, "Get away from here. I can never face your brother Joab if I have to kill you." But he refused to turn away, so Abner pierced him through the belly with the butt end of his spear. It went right through his body and came out his back. He stumbled to the ground and died there, and everyone stopped when they came to the place where he lay. Now Joab and Abishai set out after Abner. The sun was going down, and as they arrived at Ammah Hill near Giah along the road into the Gibeon desert, Abner's troops from the tribe of Benjamin regrouped there at the top of the hill. And Abner shouted down to Joab, "Must our swords continue to kill each other forever? How long will it be before you call off your people from chasing their brothers?" Joab shouted, "I swear by God that even if you hadn't spoken, we would all have gone home tomorrow morning." Then he blew his trumpet, and his men stopped chasing the troops of Israel. That night, Abner and his men retreated across the Jordan Valley, crossed the river, and traveled all the next morning until they arrived at Mahanaim. Joab and the men who were with him returned home too, and when he counted his casualties, he learned that only 19 men were missing in addition to Ashiel. But 360 of Abner's men, all from the tribe of Benjamin, were dead. That Benjamin is something else. Joab and his men took Ashiel's body to Bethlehem and buried him beside his father. Then they traveled all night and reached Hebron by daybreak, or at daybreak. 2 Samuel 3 and 1. That was the beginning of a long war between the followers of Saul and of David. David's position now became stronger and stronger, while Saul's dynasty became weaker and weaker. Several sons were born to David while he was at Hebron. The oldest was Amnon, born to his wife Ahinoam. His second son, Chileab, was born to Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third was Absalom, born to Maacah, the daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. The fourth was Adonijah, who was born to Haggith. Then Shephatiah was born to Abital, and Ithream was born to Eglah. As the war went on, Abner became a very powerful political leader among the followers of Saul. He took advantage of his position by sleeping with one of Saul's concubines, a girl named Rizpah. But when Ishbosheth accused Abner of this, Abner was furious. "Am I a Judean dog to be kicked around like this?" he shouted. "After all I've done for you and for your father by not betraying you to David, is this my reward, to find fault with me about some woman? May God curse me if I don't do everything I can to take away this entire kingdom from you, all the way from Dan to Beersheba, and give it to David, just as the Lord had predicted." Ishbosheth made no reply, for he was afraid of Abner. Then Abner sent messengers to David to discuss a deal to surrender the kingdom of Israel to him in exchange for becoming commander-in-chief of the combined armies of Israel and Judah. Wow. "All right," David replied. "I see how this is going to turn out." "All right," David replied, "but I will not negotiate with you unless you bring me my wife, Michal, Saul's daughter." David then sent this message to Ishbosheth: "Give me back my wife, Michal, for I bought her with the lives of 100 Philistines." So Ishbosheth took her away from her husband, Paltai. What a mess. He followed along behind her as far as Bahurim, weeping as he went. Then Abner told him, "Go on home now." So he returned. Meanwhile, Abner consulted with the leaders of Israel and reminded them that for a long time they'd wanted David as their king. "Now is the time," he told them, "for the Lord has said, it is David by whom I will save my people from the Philistines and from all their other enemies." Abner also talked to the leaders of the tribe of Benjamin. Then he went to Hebron and reported to David his progress with the people of Israel and Benjamin. 20 men accompanied him, and David entertained them with a feast. As Abner left, he promised David, "When I get back, I will call a convention of all the people of Israel, and they will elect you as their king, as so long as you desire, as you so long desire." And David let Abner return in safety. But just as Abner left, Joab and some of the David's troops returned from a raid, bringing much loot with them. Hot-headed Joab. When Joab was told that Abner had just been visiting the king and had been sent away in peace, he rushed to the king demanding, "What have you done? What do you mean by letting him get away? You know perfectly well that he came to spy on us and that he plans to return and attack." Then Joab sent messengers to catch up with Abner and tell him to come back. They found him at the well of Sirah, and he returned with them, but David knew nothing about it. When Abner arrived at Hebron, Joab took him aside at the city gate as if to speak with him privately. But then he pulled out a dagger and killed him in revenge for the death of his brother Ashiel. But Ashiel should have stopped following him, like he told him. Who are you people? When David heard that he declared, "I vow by the Lord." When David heard about it, he declared, "I vow by the Lord that I and my people are innocent of this crime against Abner. Joab and his family are the guilty ones. May each of his children be victims of cancer, or be lepers, or be sterile, or die of starvation, or be killed by the sword." Wow. So Joab and his brother Abishai killed Abner because of the death of their brother Asahel at the battle of Gibeon. Then David said to Joab and to all those that were with him, "Go into deep mourning for Abner." And King David commanded the bier to the cemetery. Then they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king and all the people wept at the graveside. "Should Abner have died like a fool?" the king lamented. "Your hands were not bound, your feet were not tied. You were murdered, the victim of a wicked plot." And all the people wept again for him. David had refused to eat anything the day of the funeral, and now everyone begged him to take a little bite of supper. But David vowed that he would eat nothing until sundown. This pleased his people just as everything else he did pleased them. Thus the whole nation, both Judah and Israel, understood from David's actions that he was in no way responsible for Abner's death. And David said to the people, a great leader and a great man has fallen today in Israel. And even though I am God's chosen king, I can do nothing with these two sons of Zeruiah. May the Lord repay wicked men for their wicked deeds. 2 Samuel 4. When King Ishbosheth heard that about Abner's death at Hebron, he was paralyzed with fear, and his people too were badly frightened. The command of the Israeli troops then fell to two brothers, Baanah and Rekah, who were captains of King Ishbosheth's raiding bands. They were the sons of Rimnon, who were from Beeroth and Benjamin. People from Beeroth are counted as Benjamites, even though they fled to Gittim, where they now live. There was a little lame grandson of King Saul's named Mephibosheth, who was the son of Prince Jonathan. He was 5 years old at the time Saul and Jonathan were killed at the Battle of Jezreel. When news of the outcome of the battle reached the capital, the child's nurse grabbed him and fled, but she fell and dropped him as she was running, and he became lame. Rekab and Baanah arrived at King Ishbosheth's home one noon as he was taking a nap. They walked into the kitchen as though to get a sack of wheat, but then sneaked into his bedroom and murdered him and cut off his head. These were his. Mm, mm, mm. Taking his head with them, they fled across the desert that night and escaped. They presented the head to David at Hebron. Look, they exclaimed, here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of your enemy Saul, who tried to kill you. Today the Lord has given you revenge upon Saul and upon his entire family. But David replied, I swear by the Lord who saved me from my enemies that when someone told me Saul is dead, thinking he was bringing me good news, I killed him. And that is how I rewarded him for his glad tidings. How much more shall I do to wicked men who kill a good man in his own house and on his bed? Shall I not demand your lives? So David ordered his young men to kill them, and they did. They cut off their hands and feet and hanged their bodies beside the pool in Hebron. And they took Ishbosheth's head and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron. Wow, wow, wow. 2 Samuel chapter 5. Representatives of all the tribes of Israel now came to David at Hebron and gave him their pledge of loyalty. We're your blood brothers, they said, and even when Saul was our king, you were our real leader. The Lord has said that you should be the shepherd and leader of his people. So David made a contract before the Lord with the leaders of Israel there at Hebron, and they crowned him king of Israel. He had already been the king of Judah for 7 years, since the age of 30. He then ruled 33 years in Jerusalem as king of both Israel and Judah. So he reigned 40 years altogether. David now led his troops to Jerusalem to fight against the Jebusites who lived there. You'll never come in here, they told him. Even the blind and lame could keep you out, for they thought they were safe. But David and his troops defeated them and captured the stronghold of Zion, now called the city of David. When the insulting message from the defenders of the city reached David, he told his troops, go up through the water tunnel into the city and destroy those lame and blind Jebusites. How I hate them. That is the origin of the saying, even the blind and the lame could conquer you. So David made the stronghold of Zion, also called the city of David, his headquarters. Then beginning at the old Millo section of the city, he built northward toward the present city's center. So David became greater and greater, for the Lord God of heaven was with him. Then King Hiram of Tyre sent cedar lumber, carpenters, and masons to build a palace for David. David now realized why the Lord had made him king and blessed his kingdom so greatly. It was because God wanted to pour out his kindness on Israel, his chosen people. After moving from Hebron to Jerusalem, David married additional wives and concubines and had many sons and daughters. These are his children who were born at Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhor, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, Eliphalet. When the Philistines heard that David had been crowned king of Israel, they tried to capture him. But David was told that they were coming and went into the stronghold. The Philistines arrived and spread out across the valley of Rephaim. Then David asked the Lord, shall I go and fight against them? Will you defeat them for me? And the Lord replied, yes, go ahead. I will give them to you. So David went out and fought with them at Baal Perazim and defeated them. The Lord did it, he exclaimed. He burst through my enemies like a raging flood. So he named the place Bursting. At that time, David and his troops confiscated many idols that had been abandoned by the Philistines. But the Philistines returned again and spread out across the valley of Rephaim. Then David asked the Lord what to do. He replied, don't make a frontal attack. Go behind them and come out by the balsam trees. When you hear a sound like marching feet in the tops of the balsam trees, attack, for it will signify that the Lord has prepared the way for you and will destroy them. So David is as the Lord instructed him, and destroyed the Philistines all the way from Geba to Gezer. 2 Samuel chapter 6. Then David mobilized 30,000 special troops and led them to Baal, Judah, to bring home the ark of the Lord of heaven, who is enthroned above the guardian angels. The ark was placed upon a new cart and taken from the hillside home of Abinadab. It was driven by Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio. Ahio was walking in front and was followed by David and the other leaders of Israel, who were joyfully waving branches of juniper trees and playing every sort of musical instrument before the Lord: lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah put out his hand to steady the ark. Then the anger of the Lord flared out against Uzzah, and he killed him for doing this. So he died there beside the ark. David was angry at what the Lord had done and named the spot the place of wrath upon Uzzah, what is called till this day. David was now afraid of the Lord and asked, "How can I ever bring the ark home?" So he decided against taking it into the city of David, but carried it instead to the home of Obed-Edom, who had come from Gath. It remained there for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. Then when David heard this, he brought the ark to the city of David with a great celebration. After the men who were carrying it had gone 6 paces, they stopped and waited so that he could sacrifice an ox and a fat lamb. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing priest clothing. So Israel brought home the ark of the Lord with much shouting and blowing of trumpets. But as the procession came into the city, Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from a window and saw King David, leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she was filled with contempt for him. The ark was placed inside the tent that David had prepared for it, and he sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. Then he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heaven and gave a present to everyone, men and women alike, of a loaf of bread, some wine, and a cake of raisins. When it was all over and everyone had gone home, David returned to bless his family. But Michal came out to meet him and exclaimed in disgust, "How glorious the king of Israel looked today. He exposed himself to the girls along the street like a common pervert." David retorted, "I was dancing before the Lord, who chose me above your father and his family, who appointed me as leader of Israel, the people of the Lord. So I'm willing to act like a fool in order to show my joy in the Lord. Yes, and I'm willing to look even more foolish than this. But I will be respected by the girls of whom you spoke." So Michal was childless throughout her life. 2 Samuel 7:1. When the Lord finally sent peace upon the land and Israel was no longer at war with the surrounding nations, David said to Nathan the prophet, "Look, here I'm living in this beautiful cedar palace while the ark of God is out in a tent." "Go ahead with what you have in mind," Nathan replied, "for the Lord is with you." But that night the Lord said to Nathan, "Tell my servant David not to do it, for I've never lived in a temple. My home has been a tent ever since the time I brought Israel out of Egypt. And I've never once complained to Israel's leaders, the shepherds of my people. Have I ever asked them, why haven't you built me a beautiful cedar temple?" Now I'm going to give David this message give this message to David from the Lord of heaven. "I chose you to be the leader of my people Israel when you were a mere shepherd tending your sheep in the pasture land. I've been with you wherever you've gone and have destroyed your enemies. And I will make your name greater yet, so that you will be one of the most famous men in the world. I've selected a homeland for my people, for which they shall never have to move. It will be their own land, where the heathen nations won't bother them as they did when the judges ruled my people. There will be no more wars against you, and your descendants shall rule this land for generations to come. For when you die, I will put one of your sons upon your throne, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who shall build me a temple, and I will continue his kingdom into eternity. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he sins, I will use other nations to punish him. But my love and kindness shall not leave him, as I took it from Saul, your predecessor. Your family shall rule my kingdom forever." So Nathan went back to David and told him everything the Lord had said. Then David went into the tabernacle and sat before the Lord and prayed, "O Lord God, why have you showered your blessings on such an insignificant person as I am? And now, in addition to everything else, you speak of giving me an eternal dynasty? Such generosity is far beyond any human standard, O Lord God. What can I say? For you know what I am like. You are doing all these things just because you promised to and because you want to. How great you are, Lord God. We have never heard of any other God like you, and there is no other God. What other nation in all the earth has received such blessings as Israel, your people? For you've rescued your chosen nation in order to bring glory to your name. You've done great miracles to destroy Egypt and its gods. You chose Israel to be your people forever, and you became our God. And now, Lord God, do as you promised concerning me and my family, and may you be eternally honored when you have established Israel as your people and have established my dynasty before you. For you have revealed to me, O Lord God of heaven, God of Israel, that I'm the first of a dynasty which will rule your people forever. That is why I've been bold enough to pray this prayer of acceptance. For you are indeed God, and your words are truth, and you have promised me these good things. So do as you have promised. Bless me and my family forever. May our dynasty continue on before you, for you, Lord God, have promised it." 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1. After David had subdued and humbled the Philistines by conquering Gath, their largest city, he also devastated the land of Moab. He divided his victims by making them lie down side by side in rows, 2/3 of each row, as measured with a tape, butchered, and 1/3 were spared to become David's servants. They paid him tribute each year. He also destroyed the forces of King Hadadezer, the son of Rohab, in Zobah in the battle by the Euphrates River, for Hadadezer had attempted to regain his power. David captured 1,700 cavalry and 20,000 infantry. Then he lamed all of the chariot horses except for 100 teams. He also slaughtered 22,000 Syrians from Damascus when they came to help Hadadezer. David placed several army garrisons in Damascus, and the Syrians became David's subjects and brought him annual tribute money. So the Lord gave him victories wherever he turned. David brought the gold shields to Jerusalem, which King Hadadezer's officers had used. He also carried back to Jerusalem a very large amount of bronze from Hadadezer's cities at Beta and Berothai. When King Toi of Hamath heard about David's victory over the army of Hadadezer, he sent his son Joram to congratulate him, for Hadadezer and Toi were enemies. He gave David presents made from silver, gold, and bronze. David dedicated all these to the Lord, along with the silver and gold he had taken from Syria, Moab, Ammon, the Philistines, Amalek, and King Hadadezer. So David became very famous. After his return, he destroyed 18,000 Edomites in Salt Valley, and then placed garrisons throughout Edom so that the entire nation was forced to pay tribute to Israel. Another example of the way the Lord made him victorious wherever he went. David reigned with justice over Israel and was fair to everyone. The general of his army was Joab, son of Zeruiah, and his secretary of state was Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were the high priests, and Seraiah was the king's private secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was captain of his bodyguard, and David's sons were his assistants. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1. One day David began wondering if any of Saul's family was living, for he wanted to be kind to them as he had promised Prince Jonathan. He heard about a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants, and summoned him. "Are you Ziba?" the king asked. "Yes, sir, I am," he replied. The king then asked him, "Is anyone left from Saul's family? If so, I want to fulfill a sacred vow by being kind to him." "Yes," Ziba replied. "Jonathan's lame son is still alive." "Where is he?" the king asked. "In Lodebar," Ziba told him, "at the home of Machir." So King David sent for Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. Mephibosheth arrived in great fear and greeted the king in deep humility, bowing low before him. But David said, "Don't be afraid. I've asked you to come so that I can be kind to you because of my vow to your father Jonathan. I will restore you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall live here at the palace." Mephibosheth fell to the ground before the king. "Should the king show kindness to a dead dog like me?" he exclaimed. Then the king summoned Saul's servants, Ziba. "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family," he said. "You and your sons are servants. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him, to produce for his family, but he will live here with me." Ziba, who had 15 sons and 20 servants, replied, "Sir, I will do as you commanded." And from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly with King David, as though he were one of his own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son, Micah. All the servants of Ziba became Mephibosheth's servants. But Mephibosheth, who was lame in both feet, moved to Jerusalem to live at the palace. 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1. Sometime after this, the Ammonite king died, and King Hanan replaced him. "I'm going to show special respect for him," David said, "because his father Nahash was always so loyal and kind to me." So David sent ambassadors to express regrets to Hanan about his father's death. But Hanan's officers told him, "These men aren't here to honor your father. David sent them to spy out the city before attacking it." So Hanan took David's men and shaved off half their beards and cut their robes off at the buttocks and sent them home half naked. When David heard what had happened, he told them to stay at Jericho until their beards grew out, for the men were very embarrassed over their appearance. Now the people of Ammon realized how seriously they had angered David, so they hired 20,000 Syrian mercenaries from the lands of Rechab and Zobah, 1,000 from the king of Makkah, and 10,000 from the land of Tob. When David heard about this, he sent Joab and the entire Israeli army to attack them. The Ammonites defended the gates of their city, while the Syrians from Zoab, Rehob, Tob, and Makkah fought in the fields. When Joab realized that he would have to fight on two fronts, he selected the best fighters in his army, placed them under his personal command, and took them out to fight the Syrians in the fields. He left the rest of the army to his brother Abishai, who was to attack the city. "If I need assistance against the Syrians, come out and help me," Joab instructed. "And if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I will come and help you." Courage. We must really act like men today if we're going to save our people and the cities of our God. May the Lord's will be done. And when Joab and his troops attacked, the Syrians began to run away. Then when the Ammonites saw the Syrians running, they ran too and retreated into the city. Afterward, Joab returned to Jerusalem. The Syrians now realized that they were no match for Israel. So when they regrouped, they were joined by additional Syrian troops summoned by Hadadezer from the other side of the Euphrates River. These troops arrived at Helam under the command of Shobak, the commander-in-chief of all of Hadadezer's forces. When David heard what was happening, he personally led the Israeli army to Helam, where the Syrians attacked him. But again, the Syrians fled from the Israelis, this time leaving 700 charioteers dead on the field, also 40,000 cavalrymen, including General Shobak. When Hadadezer's allies saw that the Syrians had been defeated, they surrendered to David and became his servants, and the Syrians were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore after that. 2 Samuel 11:1. In the spring of the following year, at the time when the wars began, David sent to Joab and the Israeli army to destroy the Ammonites. They began by laying siege to the city of Rabbah, but David stayed in Jerusalem. One night he couldn't sleep and went out for a stroll on the roof of the palace. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking her evening bath. What was she doing by the king's palace? He sent to find out who she was and was told that she was Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah. When David sent for her and when she came, he slept with her. She had just completed the purification rites after menstruation. Then she returned home. When she found that he had gotten her pregnant, she sent a message to inform him. So David dispatched a memo to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." When he arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how the war was prospering. Then he told him to go home and relax. He sent him a present to him at his home, but Uriah didn't go there. He stayed that night at the gateway of the palace with the other servants of the king. When David heard what Uriah had done, he summoned him and asked him, "What's the matter with you? Why didn't you go home to your wife last night after being away for so long?" Uriah replied, "The ark and the armies of the general and his officers are camping out in the open fields. And should I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I will never be guilty of acting like that." That was an honorable man. "Well, stay here tonight," David told him, "and tomorrow you may return to the army." So Uriah stayed around the palace. David invited him to dinner and got him drunk. But even so, he didn't go home that night, but again he slept at the entrance of the palace. Finally, the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab to put Uriah at the front of the hottest part of the battle, then pull back and leave him there to die. So Joab assigned Uriah a spot close to the besieged city where he knew that the enemy's best men were fighting. And Uriah was killed along with several other Israeli soldiers. When Joab sent a report to David of how the battle was going, he told his messenger, "If the king is angry and asks, 'Why did the troops go so close to the city?' didn't they know that they would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech killed at Thebez by a woman who threw down a millstone from him? Then tell him Uriah was killed too." So the messenger arrived at Jerusalem and gave the report to David. "The enemy came out against us," he said, "and as we chased them back to the city gates, the men of the wall attacked us, and some of the men were killed, and Uriah the Hittite is dead too." "Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged," David said. "The sword kills one as another." Ooh, that's hard-hearted. That's cold-blooded. "Fight harder the next time and conquer the city. Tell him that he's doing well." When Bathsheba heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. Then when the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. That is low down. And she gave birth to his son, but the Lord was very displeased with what David had done. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1. So the Lord sent the prophet Nathan to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain city. One was very rich, owning many flocks of sheep and herd of goats, and the other was very poor, owning nothing but a little lamb he had managed to buy. It was his children's pet, and he fed it with his own plate and let it drink from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. Recently, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing the lamb from his own flock for food for the traveler, he took the poor man's lamb and roasted it and served it. David was furious. "I swear by the living God," he vowed, "any man who would do a thing like that should be put to death. He shall repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are that rich man. The Lord God of Israel says, I made you king over Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you his palace and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the laws of God and done this horrible deed? For you've murdered Uriah and stolen his wife. Therefore murder shall be a constant threat in your family from this time on, because you have insulted me by taking Uriah's wife. I vow that because of what you have done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you, and I will give your wives to another man, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will do this openly in the sight of all Israel. I have sinned against the Lord," David confessed to Nathan. Then Nathan replied, yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. But you've given great opportunity to the enemies of the Lord to despise and blaspheme him, so your child shall die. Then Nathan returned to his home, and the Lord made Bathsheba's baby deathly sick. David begged him to spare the child and went without food and lay all night before the Lord on the bare earth. The leaders of the nation pleaded with him to get up and eat with them, but he refused. And on the seventh day, the baby died. David's aides were afraid to tell him. He was so broken up by the baby being sick, they said, what will he do to himself when we tell him the child is dead? But when David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. Is the baby dead? Yes, they replied, he is. Then David got up off the ground, washed himself, brushed his hair, changed his clothes, went into the tabernacle and worshiped the Lord. Then he returned to the palace and ate. His aides were amazed. We don't understand you, they told him. While the baby was still living, you wept and refused to eat. But now that the baby is dead, you stopped your mourning and you're eating again. David replied, I fasted and wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. Then David comforted Bathsheba when he slept. Then David comforted Bathsheba. And when he slept with her, she conceived and gave birth to a son and named him Solomon. And the Lord loved the baby and sent congratulations and blessings through Nathan the prophet. David nicknamed the baby Jedediah, meaning beloved of Jehovah because of the Lord's interest. Meanwhile, Joab and the Israeli army were successfully ending their siege at Rabbah, the capital of Ammon. Joab sent messengers to tell David, Rabbah and its beautiful harbor are ours. Now bring the rest of the army and finish the job so that you will get credit for the victory instead of me. So David led his army to Rabbah and captured it. Tremendous amounts of loot were carried back to Jerusalem, and David took the king of Rabbah's crown, a $50,000 treasure made from solid gold set with gems, and placed it on his own head. He made slaves of the people of the city and made them labor with saws, picks, and axes and work in the brick kilns. That is the way that he treated all of the cities of the Ammonites. Then David and the army returned to Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 13. Prince Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Prince Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Amnon became so tormented by his love for her that he became ill. He had no way of talking to her, for the girls and young men were kept strictly apart. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemiah. One day Jonadab said to Amnon, what's the trouble? Why should the son of a king look so haggard morning after morning? So Amnon told him, I'm in love with Tamar, my half-sister. Well, Jonadab said, I'll tell you what to do. Go back and go to bed and pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him you'll feel better if she feeds you. So Amnon did, and when the king came to see him, Amnon asked him for this favor, that his sister Tamar be permitted to come and cook a little something for him to eat. David agreed and sent word to Tamar to go to Amnon's quarters and prepare some food for him. So she did and went into his bedroom so that he could watch her make some dough. Then she baked some special bread for him, but when she set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. Everyone get out of here, he told the servants. So they all left the apartment. Then he said to Tamar, now bring me the food again here in my bedroom and feed it to me. So Tamar took it to him, but as she was standing there before him, he grabbed her and demanded, come to bed with me, my darling. Oh, Amnon, she cried, don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. You know what a serious crime it is in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please just speak to the king about it, for he will let you marry me. But he wouldn't listen to her. And since he was stronger than she, he forced her. Then suddenly his love turned to hate, and now he hated her more than he had loved her. That's a demon is what that is. Get out of here, he snarled at her. No, no, she cried. To reject me now is a greater crime than the other you did to me. But he wouldn't listen to her. He shouted for his valet and demanded, throw this woman out and lock the door behind her. So he put her out. She was wearing a long robe with sleeves, as was the custom in those days for virgin daughters of the king. Now she tore the robe and put ashes on her head, with her head in her hands, and went away crying. Her brother Absalom asked her, is it true Amnon raped you? Don't be so upset, since it's all in the family anyway. It's nothing to worry about. So Tamar lived in a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's quarters. When King David heard what had happened, he was very angry, but Absalom said nothing one way or the other about this to Amnon. However, he hated him with a deep hatred because of what he had done to his sister. Then 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal-hazor in Ephraim, Absalom invited his father and all his brothers to come to a feast to celebrate the occasion. The king replied, no, my boy, if we all came, we would be too much of a burden on you. Absalom pressed him, but he wouldn't come. So though he sent him thanks. Well, then Absalom said, if you can't come, how about sending my brother Amnon instead? Why Amnon? The king asked. David, you got to have better sense than that. Absalom kept on urging the matter until finally the king agreed and let all of his sons attend, including Amnon. Absalom told his men, wait until Amnon gets drunk, then at my signal, kill him. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who gives orders around here, and this is the command. Take courage and do it. So they murdered Amnon. Then the other sons of the king jumped on their mules and fled. As they were on their way back to Jerusalem, the report reached David, Absalom has killed all of your sons, and not one is left alive. The king jumped up, ripped off his robe, and fell prostrate on the ground. His aides also tore their clothes in horror and sorrow. But just then, Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shimei, arrived and said, no, not all have been killed. It was only Amnon. Absalom has been plotting this ever since Amnon raped Tamar. No, your sons aren't all dead. It was only Amnon. Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Now the watchman on the Jerusalem wall saw a great crowd coming toward the city along the road at the side of the hill. See, Jonadab told the king, they are there now. Your sons are coming, just as I said. They soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and his officials wept with them. Well, why didn't you all weep when that young lady was raped? Let's read that again. They soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and his officials wept with them when they should have been weeping with what had happened to their sister. Absalom fled to King Talmai of Geshur, son of Amminahud, and stayed there 3 years. Meanwhile, David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed day after day for fellowship with his son Absalom. 2 Samuel 14. When General Joab realized how much the king was longing to see Absalom, he sent for a woman of Tekoa who had a reputation for great wisdom and told her to ask for an appointment with the king. He told her what to say to him. Pretend you were in mourning, Joab instructed her. Wear mourning clothes and dishevel your hair as though you had been in deep sorrow for a long time. When the woman approached the king, she fell face downward on the floor in front of him and cried out, "O king, help me. What's the trouble?" he asked. "I'm a widow," she replied, "and my 2 sons had a fight out on the field, and since no one was there to part them, one of them was killed. Now the rest of the family is demanding that I surrender my other son to them to be executed for murdering his brother. But if I do that, I'll have no one left, and so my husband's name will be destroyed from the face of the earth." "Leave it with me," the king told her. "I will see to it that no one touches him." "Oh, thank you, my lord," she replied, "and I'll take the responsibility if you are criticized for helping me like this." "Don't worry about that," the king replied. "If anyone objects, bring him to me. I can assure you he will never complain again." Then she says, "Please swear to me by God that you won't let anyone harm my son. I want no more bloodshed." "I vow by God," he replied, "that not a hair of your son's head shall be disturbed." "Please let me ask one more thing of you," she said. "Go ahead," he replied. "Speak." "Why don't you do as much for all the people of God as you promised to do for me?" she asked. "You convicted yourself in making this decision because you refused to bring home your own banished son. All of us must die eventually. Our lives are like water that is poured out on the ground, can't be gathered up. But God will bless you with longer life if you will find a way to bring your son back from this exile. But I've come to plead with you for my son because of my life and my son's life have been threatened, and said to myself, perhaps the king will listen to me and rescue us from those who would end our existence in Israel. Yes, the king will give us peace again. I know that you are a man. I know that you are like an angel of God and can discern between good from evil. May God be with you. I want to know one thing," the king replied. "Yes, my lord," she asked. "Did Joab send you here?" And the Roman woman replied, "How can I deny it? Yes, Joab sent to me and told me what to say. He did it in order to place the matter before you in a different light. But you are wise as an angel of God and you know everything that happens." So the king sent for Joab and told him, "All right, go and bring back Absalom." Joab fell to the ground before the king and blessed him and said, "At last I know that you like me, for you have granted me this request." Then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. "He may go to his own quarters," the king ordered, "but he must never come here. I refuse to see him." No one in Israel was such a handsome specimen of manhood as Absalom, and no one else received such praise. He cut his hair only once a year, and then only because it weighed 3 pounds and was too much of a load to carry around. He had 3 sons and 1 daughter, Tamar, who was a very beautiful girl. After Absalom had been in Jerusalem for 2 years and had not seen the king, he sent for Joab to ask him to intercede for him, but Joab wouldn't come. Absalom sent for him again, but he again refused to come. So Absalom said to his servants, "Go and set fire to that barley field of Joab's next to mine," and they did. Then Joab came to Absalom and demanded, "Why did your servant set my field on fire?" And Absalom replied, "Because I wanted to ask the king why he brought me back from Geshur if he didn't intend to see me. I might as well have stayed there. Let me have an interview with the king. Then if he finds that I'm guilty of murder, let him execute me. So Joab told the king what Absalom had said. Then at last David summoned Absalom, and he came and bowed low before the king, and David kissed him. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 1. Absalom then bought a magnificent chariot and chariot horses and hired 50 footmen to run ahead of him. He got up early every morning and went out to the gate of the city, and when anyone came to bring a case to the king for trial, Absalom called him over and expressed interest in his problem. He would say, I can see that you are right in this matter. It's unfortunate that the king doesn't have anyone to assist him in hearing these cases. I surely wish I were the judge, then anyone with a lawsuit could come to me, and I would give him justice. And when anyone came to bow to him, Absalom wouldn't let him, but shook his hand instead. So in this way, Absalom stole the hearts of the people, stole the hearts of all the people of Israel. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king, let me go to Hebron to sacrifice to the Lord in fulfillment of a vow I made to him while I was at Geshur, that if he would bring me back to Jerusalem, I would sacrifice to him. All right, the king told him, go and fulfill your vow. So Absalom went to Hebron, but while he was there, he sent spies to every part of Israel to incite rebellion against the king. As soon as you hear the trumpets, his message read, you will know that Absalom has been crowned in Hebron. He took 200 men from Jerusalem with him as guests, but they knew nothing of his intentions. While he was offering the sacrifice, he sent for Ahithophel, one of David's counselors who lived in Gilo. Ahithophel declared for Absalom, as did more and more others. So the conspiracy became very strong. A messenger soon arrived in Jerusalem to tell King David, all Israel has joined Absalom in a conspiracy against you. Then we must flee at once, or it will be too late, was David's instant response to his men. If we get out of the city before he arrives, both we and the city of Jerusalem will be saved. We are with you, his aides replied. Do as you think best. So the king and his household set out at once. He left no one behind except 10 of his young wives to keep the palace in order. David paused at the edge of the city to let his troops move past him to lead the way, 600 Gittites who had come with him from Gath, and Cherethites and Pelethites. But suddenly the king turned to Attai, the captain of the 600 Gittites, and said to him, what are you doing here? Go on back with your men to Jerusalem to your king, for you are a guest in Israel, a foreigner in exile. It seems but yesterday that you arrived, and now today should I force you to wander with us? Who knows where? Go on back and take your troops with you, and may the Lord be merciful to you. But Ittai replied, I vow by God and by your own life that wherever you go, I will go, no matter what happens, whether it means life or death. So David replied, all right, come with us. Then Ittai and the 600 men and their families went along. There was deep sadness throughout the city as the king and his retinue passed by, crossed Kidron Brook, went out into the country. Abiathar and Zadok and the Levites took the Ark of the Covenant of God and set it down beside the road until everyone had passed. Then, following David's instructions, Zadok took the ark back into the city. If the Lord sees fit, David said, he will bring me back to see the ark and the tabernacle again. But if he is through with me, well, let him do what seems best to him. Then the king told Zadok, look, here's my plan. Return quietly to the city with your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. I will stop at the ford of the Jordan River and wait there for a message from you. Let me know what happens in Jerusalem before I disappear into the wilderness. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back into the city and stayed there. David walked up the road that led to the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and his feet were bare as a sign of mourning. And the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they climbed the mountain. When someone told David that Ahithophel, his advisor, was backing Absalom, David prayed, oh Lord, please make Ahithophel give Absalom foolish advice. As he reached the spot on the top of the Mount of Olives where people worshiped God, David found Hushai the Archite waiting for him with torn clothing and earth upon his head. But David told him, if you go with me, you will only be a burden. Return to Jerusalem and tell Absalom, I will counsel you as I did your father. Then you can frustrate and counter Ahithophel's advice. Zadok and Abiathar the priests are there. Tell them the plans that are being made to capture me. And they will send their sons Ahimaaz and Jonathan to find me and tell me what is going on. So David's friend Hushai returned to the city, getting there just as Absalom arrived. 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. David was just past the top of the hill when Ziba, the manager of Mephibosheth's household, caught up with him. He was leading 2 donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of grapes, and a small barrel of wine. What are these for? The king asked Ziba. And Ziba replied, the donkeys are for your people to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit are for the young men to eat. The wine is to be taken with you into the wilderness for anyone who's going to faint. All right. And where's Mephibosheth? The king asked him. He stayed at Jerusalem, Ziba replied. He said, now I'll get to be king. Today I will get, wait a minute, you're a liar. You're a lying wonder. Where's Mephibosheth? The king asked him. He stayed at Jerusalem, Ziba replied. He said, now I'll get to be king. Today I will get back the kingdom of my father Saul. You're a lying wonder. In that case, the king told Ziba, I give you everything he owns. Thank you, sir, Ziba replied. And David and his party passed Bahurim. A man came out of the village cursing him. It was Shimei, the son of Gera, a member of Saul's family. He threw stones at the king and the king's officers and all the mighty warriors who surrounded them. Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel, he shouted at David. The Lord is paying you back for murdering King Saul and his family. You stole his throne. Now the Lord has given it to your son Absalom. At last you will taste some of your own medicine, you murderer. Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Abishai demanded. Let me go over and strike off his head. No, the king said, if the Lord has told him to curse me, who am I to say no? My own son is trying to kill me, and this Benjamite is merely cursing me. Leave him alone, for no doubt the Lord has told him to do it, and perhaps the Lord will see that I'm being wronged and will bless me because of these curses. So David and his men continued on, and Shimei kept pace with them on a nearby hillside, cursing as he went and throwing stones at David and tossing dust into the air. The king and all those who were with him were weary by the time they reached Bahurim, so they stayed there a while and rested. Meanwhile, Absalom and his men arrived at Jerusalem accompanied by Ahithophel. When David's friend Hushai the Archite arrived, he went immediately to see Absalom. Long live the king, he exclaimed. Long live the king. Is this the way to treat your friend David? Absalom asked him. Why aren't you with him? Oh, because I work for the man who was chosen by the Lord and by Israel, Hushai replied. Anyway, why shouldn't I? I helped your father, and I will help you. Then Absalom turned to Ahithophel and asked him, what shall I do next? Ahithophel told him, go and sleep with your father's wives, for he has left them here to keep the house. Then all Israel will know that you have insulted him beyond the possibility of reconciliation, and they will all close ranks behind you. So a tent was erected on the roof of the palace where everybody could see it, and Absalom went into the tent to lie with his father's wives. Absalom did whatever Ahithophel told him to, just as David had, for every word Ahithophel spoke seemed as wise as though it had come directly from the mouth of God. 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1. Now Ahithophel said, give me 12,000 men to start out after David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and he and his troops will be thrown into a panic, and everyone will run away. And I will kill only the king and let all those who are with him live and restore them to you. Absalom and all the elders approved of the plan, but Absalom said, ask Hushai the Archite what he thinks about this. When Hushai arrived, Absalom told him what Ahithophel had said. What is your opinion? Absalom asked. Absalom asked him, should we follow Ahithophel's advice? If not, speak up. Well, Hushai replied, this time I think Ahithophel has made a mistake. You know your father and his men, they are mighty warriors and are probably as upset as a mother bear who's been robbed of her cubs. And your father's an old soldier and isn't going to be spending the night among the troops. He's probably already hidden in some pit or cave. And when he comes out and attacks and a few of your men fall, there will be panic among your troops and everyone will start shouting that your men are being slaughtered. Then even the bravest of them, though they have hearts of lions, will be paralyzed with fear, for all Israel knows what a mighty man your father is and how courageous his soldiers are. What I suggest is that you mobilize the entire army of Israel, bringing them as far away as Dan and Beersheba, so that you will have a huge force. And I think that you should personally lead the troops. Then when we find him, we can destroy his entire army, so that not one of them is left alive. And if David has escaped into some city, you will have the entire army of Israel there at your command, and we can take ropes and drag down the walls of the city into the nearest valley until every stone is torn down. Then Absalom and all the men of Israel said, Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's, for the Lord had arranged to defeat the counsel of Ahithophel, which really was the better plan, so that he could bring disaster upon Absalom. Then Hushai reported to Zadok and Abiathar the priest what Ahithophel had said and what he himself had suggested instead. Quick, he told them, find David and urge him not to stay at the ford at the Jordan River tonight. He must go across into the wilderness beyond. Otherwise, he will die and his entire army with him. Jonathan and Ahimaaz had been staying in Rogel so as not to be seen entering the city or leaving the city. Arrangements had been made for a servant girl to carry them the messages they were to take to King David. But a boy saw them leaving in Rogel to go to David, and he told Absalom about it. Meanwhile, they escaped to Bahurim, where a man hid them inside a well in his backyard. The man's wife put a cloth over the top of the well with grain on it to dry in the sun, so that no one suspected that they were there. When Absalom's men arrived and asked her if she had seen Ahimaaz and Jonathan, they said they had crossed the brook and were gone. They looked for them without success and returned to Jerusalem. Then the two men crawled out the well and hurried on to King David. Quick, they told him, cross the Jordan tonight. And they told him how Ahithophel had advised that he be captured and killed. So David and all the people went with him, went across that night, and were all on the other bank before the dawn. Meanwhile, Ahithophel, publicly disgraced when Absalom refused his advice, saddled his donkey, went to his hometown, set his affairs in order, and hanged himself. So he died and was buried beside his father. David soon arrived at Mahanaim. Meanwhile, Absalom had mobilized the entire army of Israel and was leading the men across the Jordan River. Absalom had appointed Amasa as general of the army, replacing Joab. Amasa was Joab's second son. Amasa was Joab's second cousin, rather. His father was Itharah, an Ishmaelite, and his mother was Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, who was the sister of Joab's mother, Zeruiah. Absalom and the Israeli army now camped in the land of Gilead. When David arrived at Mahanaim, he was warmly greeted by Shobai, the son of Nahash of Rabbah, an Ammonite, and Mechir, son of Amiel of Lodebar, and Barzillai, a Gileadite of Rogelim. They brought him and those who were with him mats to sleep on, cooking pots, serving bowls, wheat and barley, flour, parched grain, beans, lentils, honey, butter, and cheese. For they said, you must be very tired and hungry and thirsty after your long march through the wilderness. And my, wasn't that some kind of meal? 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1. David now appointed regimental colonels and companies commanders over his troops. A third were placed under Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king planned to lead the army himself, but his men objected strongly. You mustn't do it, they replied, for if we turn and run and half of us die, it will make no difference to them. They will only be looking for you. You're worth 10,000 of us, and it's better for you to stay here in the city and send us help if we need it. Well, whatever you think is best, the king finally replied. So they stood at the gate of the city as all the troops passed by. And the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Attai, for my sake, deal gently with young Absalom. And all the troops heard the king gave them this charge. So the battle began in the forest of Ephraim, and the Israeli troops were beaten back by David's men. There was a great slaughter, and 20,000 men laid down their lives that day. The battle raged all across the countryside, and more men disappeared in the forest and were killed. During the battle, Absalom came upon some of David's men as he fled on his mule. It went beneath the thick boughs of a great oak tree, and his hair got caught in the branches. His mule went on, leaving him dangling in the air. One of David's men saw him and told Joab, "What? You saw him there and didn't kill him?" Joab replied. "I would have rewarded you handsomely and made you commissioned officer. For $1,000,000, I wouldn't do it," the man replied. "We all heard the king say to you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, please don't harm young Absalom. And if I betrayed the king by killing his son, and the king certainly would find out who did it, you yourself would be the first to accuse me." Even though enough of this nonsense, Joab said. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into the heart of Absalom as he dangled alive from the oak. 10 of Joab's young armor bearers then surrounded Absalom and finished him off. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and his men returned from chasing the army of Israel. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled a great heap of stones over it. And the army of Israel fled to their homes. Absalom had built a monument to himself in the king's valley, for he said, "I have no sons to carry on my name." He called it Absalom's monument, as it is still known today. Then Zadok's son Amias said, "Let me run to King David with the good news that the Lord has saved him from his enemy Absalom." "No," Joab told him, "it wouldn't be good news to tell the king that his son is dead. You can be my messenger some other time." Then Joab said to a man from Cush, "Go tell the king what you've seen." The man bowed and ran off. But Ahimaaz pleaded with Joab, "Please let me go too." "No, we don't need you now, my boy," Joab replied. "There's no further news to send." "Yes, but let me go anyway," he begged. And Joab finally said, "All right, go ahead." Then Ahimaaz took a shortcut pass through the plain and got there ahead of the man from Cush. David was sitting at the gate of the city when the watchman climbed the stairs to his post at the top of the wall. He saw a lone man running toward him. He shouted the news down to David, and the king replied, if he is alone, he has news. And the messenger came closer. The watchman saw another man running toward them. He shouted, "Here comes another man." And the king replied, "He will have more news." The first man looks like Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, the watchman said. "He is a good man and comes with good news," the king replied. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "All is well." He bowed low with his face to the ground and said, "Blessed be the Lord God who has destroyed the rebels who dared to stand against you." "What of the young man Absalom?" the king replied. "Is he all right?" When Joab told me to come, there was a lot of shouting, but I didn't know what was happening. Ahimaaz answered. Wait here, the king told him. So Ahimaaz stepped aside. Then the man from Cush arrived and said, I have good news for the Lord my king. Today Jehovah has rescued you from all those who rebelled against you. What about young Absalom? Is he all right? The king demanded. And the man replied, May all your enemies be as that young man is. Then the king broke into tears and went up to his room over the gate, crying as he went, Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I could have died for you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. This is the word of the Lord. Very sad story.